There's a number of ways of frying fish. You can either pan fry, stir fry or deep fry. But for pan frying, it's ideal for small, fairly thin fillets of fish. And what I have today is a little bit of brill that Terry has filleted and skinned for me. For this particular fish, it's not going to take very long to cook, so we could probably get away with just cooking it in plain butter. If the fish fillet is a little bit thicker than that, you might need to put a splash of oil in the pan first in order to allow the temperature to get to a slightly higher burn point before the butter burns. So by putting a little bit of oil in there and the butter, it just dilutes it and you can take it to a higher temperature. So as it's this thickness, I'm just going to use butter today, but before I do that, I need to roll the fish in a little bit of seasoned flour to give it a really nice coating. You don't have to do this, but it does make it much more effective when it comes to seasoning it, and it also helps prevent it sticking to the bottom of the pan. The most important thing about flouring fish is that you flour your fillets, you dust off the excess, but you only want to roll them in flour just before you cook them, because the moisture in the fish actually softens and makes the flour a little bit soggy. So it's important that you just do it prior to cooking. Now, as this brill is not going to be in the pan for very long, I want to melt the butter, and the first thing it will do is start to sizzle. You want to wait for the sizzling to go completely quiet. The butter will then start to brown, and it's that temperature that it is then ready to cook your fish fillets. So put the bit of butter in the pan. The other alternative, which is something that people consider a lot at the moment, is to use coconut oil, or you can just use your rapeseed oil or your vegetable oil. Vegetable oil will give you a slightly lighter taste, although it's still fat. The same with coconut oil, and the coconut doesn't come through very strongly, but it gives you a slightly lighter finish. So for pan frying, you want to allow the butter to sizzle, and as soon as it stops sizzling, it will begin to brown. It's at that temperature and that stage, it's ready to take the fish. Now, when I'm pan frying the fish, the first side of frying is always the best side. So I want to make sure that the bone side of the fish goes down first in the hot butter. Just about stopped sizzling, it's now started to brown. I'm going to drop my fish fillets in, bone side down, and then immediately turn the temperature right down, because if you leave it on a really high heat, the butter will scorch the flour and it goes a little bit dark. But these fish fillets are going to take about 30 to 40 minutes to cook on either side. So I'm slowly counting in my head to about 30, and then I'm going to turn the fish over and cook them for a little bit longer on the second side. The most incredible thing about this, it is such a quick way of cooking fish. If you want to cook a fish fillet like a salmon fillet, it's going to take more like 2 to 3 minutes per side to cook through. I wouldn't use butter. What I would do though is put a little bit of flavoured butter on right at the end, just to melt and just finish the fish in that way. The fish now has got a nice colour. I'm going to lift it onto the dish. I've only cooked 3 fillets today, but it just gives you a little bit of an idea. What you don't want to do is crowd the pan. You've got a really nice colour on that. And then I want to think about finishing them. Now, this is perfect just as it is. Again, squeeze of lemon or whatever you want over it. But I'm also going to finish this using what is known as a Meunier butter. So for something really special to finish this, I'm just going to wipe out the burnt butter at the bottom of the pan. It will have a little bit of flour in there. You don't want to carry on cooking. You don't want to carry on cooking in that butter. And I'm then going to put a little bit more butter in there. Classic French recipes use a huge amount, anything up to 100 grams. I'm just going to put a little bit in there today just to show you how to complete it. You put your butter in there, you shake the butter over the heat to allow it to melt evenly, and again I want to allow this to stop sizzling and start to go brown. That is then known as a beurre noisette. A classic finish to skate is to actually burn the butter, so you take it to the next stage. If you don't allow the butter to go to a really lovely rich brown, it will actually taste incredibly rich and it doesn't work as well. If you don't allow it to get to a really lovely nut brown, the whole dish just tastes a little bit greasy. So it's really important to allow the butter to get to a really good colour. Once my butter has stopped sizzling and has begun to go a little bit brown around the edge, it begins to smell really, really nutty. I'm going to add some chopped herbs. Today, I've got finely chopped parsley and a little bit of sage in there. I've also got some capers which have been just rinsed and just lightly chopped. You want to swirl that around in the pan, and finally you squeeze over some lemon, and when it's still sizzling you want to pour it all over your fish. That is probably one of the most decadent but the most delicious ways of pan frying fish. You've got some really lovely flavours in there, and brill is quite sensational. For pan frying a thicker fillet, and here I have got some salmon darns, or you could use a boneless salmon fillet. You want to pan fry it in a little bit of oil to begin with and then finish it in the oven. So I'm going to use a little bit of rapeseed oil or vegetable oil, and I'm going to just lightly season. Be careful not too much with this, because when this comes out of the oven I'm going to put a little bit of butter, or seasoned butter or flavoured butter, to go over the top. So the most important thing is to get the temperature of the pan and the oil to a nice high temperature. The oil, when you put it in there, as it heats it begins to expand and it runs loosely around the pan. And then I'm going to put my salmon fillets in. I'm going to pan fry them for about a minute or so. I'm then going to turn them onto the second side. They will still be raw in the middle, so I'm going to finish the cooking by putting them into an oven set at 200 degrees Celsius or gas mark 6, and I'm going to cook them until they're cooked through to completion. We know when this fish is cooked, it will lose its translucency, it goes paler, and if you run the knife either side of the bone, you will feel the fish pull away from the bone. So in goes my salmon into a nice hot pan. I've not bothered with flour with this. When I pan fry fish fillets, I very often put flour in. And I want to cook it long enough so that it releases from the base of the pan. The most important thing when you're frying like this is to not keep moving it around. Put it in, it will stick. Once it unsticks, it's usually good enough to turn over. The advantage of cooking a fish on the bone, as I've stated in several other videos, is the help that the bone gives by creating moisture for the fish, so it's less likely to dry out in the pan. Still sticking slightly. If you try turning it too early, you'll tear the fish fillet. A little bit of colour on there, gently lifting it and then flipping it over. All I need to do now is put that pan into the oven. I've chosen a pan with a metal handle, and I'm going to finish the cooking. It will take another 6 minutes to cook this through to completion. When you're using herbs with fish, you can really use a wide selection. Dill, chives, chervil and parsley, here we've got a bit of dill, all work really well, but so do more robust herbs like sage and rosemary, and here we have a little bit of wild garlic leaf. Lemon and citrus also work very well, and when we make a flavouring to go on the top of a grilled fish, we very often use a flavoured butter. The butter I'm going to put on my salmon today is a herb butter, and it's quite possibly got loads of tarragon, which is also another herb that works particularly well with fish. One really important tip is if you put something in the oven that you aren't used to, as something you can move around without a hand, with a glove, you always hold onto the, or put your hand in the glove and hold onto the handle, or drape a bit of tea towel or something over that just to remind you that the pan handle is really hot. I've got my salmon here. I'm going to lift that and onto a plate. We can check again to see how well the fish is cooked. On here, the skin will peel away, but I will also see, or can see, that the flesh has started pulling away from the bone. But the advantage of cooking this on the bone is it would have helped retain the moisture of the fish. Just to serve that today then, I'm going to put a little bit of flavoured butter over the top. We'll split that in half and let that melt over the fish. And that actually also seasons the fish as you go. I'm going to put a little bit of rosemary on there today, just as some garnish. And a couple of lemon wedges, just to serve. So the skin peels away really nicely, and the fish will break away from the bone, and still I can see moisture, and that's absolutely essential when you're cooking fish.